snowflakes clung to her black hair, melting into the red Wyoming dust from the blood that dripped from her wrists. And I knew, right then, I was about to throw away everything I'd built. 45 years old, and there I was on Christmas Eve, kneeling beside a dying Chinese woman under the skeletal branches of an old willow tree by Crow Creek. Her chest hitched in little ragged pulls, and strands of black hair were stuck to the sweat on her bronze shoulders. Half gone as she was, something in her face snagged the air right out of my lungs, like staring down a mare that had sooner kick your teeth in than take a bit. Dealing with the affairs of the Chinese railroad towns wasn't my business, but as I felt for the pulse at her throat and saw the leather bindings cutting into torn skin, I heard my dead wife's voice in my memory. Mary used to say a man's measure isn't taken in front of a crowd, it's what he does with the wind in his face and nobody to see. Hell, sometimes the law and what's right don't even ride the same trail. And when they split, well, you pay in blood or regret. You ever saved someone knowing it might destroy you? Stick around, this story gets a hell of a lot more complicated. And if you're the kind who appreciates tales from when the West was still wild, hit that subscribe button. Trust me, you'll want to hear how this ends. My ranch sat 30 miles from Cheyenne, where the prairie stretched so endless in the winter snow it made a man feel both free and small. I'd chosen that isolation after burying my wife, Mary, and our 2 children. 3 winters had passed since the blizzard swept through Wyoming like a phantom, taking everyone I loved in less than a week. Now, just the wind hissed through the grass, and the silence made it easy to blame the hurt in my ribs on thin air. I was checking the fence line near the frozen creek when I saw her, a splash of color against the white snow that didn't belong. My gelding shied hard, damn near dumped me, hooves scrabbling like he'd seen a ghost. I pulled my Winchester and approached on foot. She lay crumpled beneath that ancient willow, hands bound with rawhide. Her silk dress, the color of a winter sunset, was torn and bloody. Somebody had laid into her with a whip until the hide split, leaving purple ridges standing up like fresh-plowed furrows. Chinese, I could tell from the fine silk and a small jade pendant that had survived the assault, catching the pale afternoon sun. But it was her face that stopped me cold. High cheekbones, full lips parted over skin like polished ivory. Maybe 22, 23 at most. Young, too damn young to die like this. My practical mind catalogued the dangers. The tongs from the railroad towns ran their own brutal justice, and the local lawmen wanted nothing to do with it. Getting involved could mean death for both of us. But as I watched her struggle for each breath, I heard Mary again, and I knew I couldn't ride away. Ah, hell, I muttered. I cut the bindings with my knife, careful around the torn skin. I scooped her up. Christ, she weighed less than a saddle. Then, her eyes cracked open. Dark, deep pools that held such fierce pride even when she was broken. Easy now, I said softly. You're safe, she tried to speak but only managed to croak, her strength failing completely when she attempted to push away. The ride back was a different kind of torture. She was barely conscious, her body limp against mine. Every step my horse took through the deepening snow pressed her soft curves more intimately against my chest. The scent of her, of cold air and something uniquely feminine, filled my nostrils. It had been 3 years since I'd held a woman, and my body responded despite the circumstances, despite my shame at such thoughts while she lay dying. By the time we reached my cabin, the sun was a pale smear behind the mountains, painting the snowy landscape in shades of grey and rose. You judging me for that, friend? For feeling desire while carrying a dying woman? Maybe you should. But I'm telling you what happened, not what should have happened. My cabin was rough but clean, 2 rooms, a stone fireplace, and walls lined with books Mary had insisted on. I laid her on my own bed, heated water, and gathered clean cloth. I dabbed the blood from her back, trying not to stare at how the knobs of her spine stuck out under skin gone thin as parchment from her ordeal. But when she suddenly jerked awake and rolled away, a small, sharp blade appearing in her hand like magic, all clinical detachment vanished. Stay back, she said, her English accented but clear. I raised my hands, the water bowl balanced in one. Easy. I'm not going to hurt you. You are a white man. You think all you touch is yours? Her dark eyes blazed with hatred and pain. I think you were dying by that creek, and now you're not, I replied. Everything else we can figure out later. She studied my face, the knife steady despite her weakness. Whatever she saw there made her lower the blade slightly. Why, she whispered. 'Cause leaving you. Hell, that would make me smaller than the shadow I already cast. We stared at each other across that small room. The lamplight made her cheekbones sharper, and the torn silk slid down one shoulder, showing the soft rise where a man's hand might rest if he dared. I forced myself to look away. I am she said finally. It means a beautiful flower, but they said I dishonoured it. What was your crime? Her laugh was bitter. I refused to marry the man my family promised me to. Mr. Guan. He is old and cruel. He runs the tongs in Cheyenne. I said no. She met my eyes defiantly. To my family, this is rebellion. Something shifted in my chest, anger at whoever hurt her, but also recognition. Another soul punished for choosing their own path. Well, I said carefully, in my house, a woman's no means no. And you can call yourself whatever name feels right. A small, hesitant smile touched her lips. My is fine. Then she gestured to the water. Will you let me clean these wounds? They'll fester if we don't tend them proper. This time, when I touched her, she didn't pull away. My calloused fingers were gentle, and I tried to ignore how she shivered when I traced the cloth along her collarbone, the soft gasp at particularly tender spots. You have done this before, she said quietly. Doctoring in the war teaches a man many things, not all of them about killing. As I worked, she studied my face, the weathered lines around my green eyes, the grey threading through my brown hair, the quiet competence in my movements. Your woman, I said, noticing the feminine touches around the cabin, the curtains, the wildflowers pressed in a book. Where is she? My hand stilled. Buried on the hill behind the house. Her and our 2 children. 3 winters passed. I am sorry, and she was. I could hear it in her voice. That is why you live alone. Seemed safer that way. Can't lose what you don't have. I reached out, almost without thinking, and touched my cheek. The intimacy surprised us both, but neither of us pulled away. Safe, she whispered, is sometimes just another cage. Only you hold the key from inside. Damn if she wasn't right about that. The snows came heavy that year, and we were trapped together in that small cabin. In the days that followed, I proved she was more than just a beautiful face. Her hands, though delicate, were strong. She insisted on earning her keep the moment she could walk, mending my clothes with stitches so fine they were nearly invisible, grinding corn, and tending to the small indoor herb garden Mary had kept. You don't owe me anything, I told her one morning, watching her work. I owe myself, she replied without looking up. I will not be a burden to any man again. But it was the small moments that undid me. The way she hummed while working, soft melodies from a land I'd never see that made my chest tight. How she'd stand by the window at sunset, watching the snow-covered prairie burn. A week in, she caught me staring while she stirred a pot over the fire. Our eyes met across the room, and something electric passed between us, an acknowledgement of the desire we'd both been pretending didn't exist. That evening, she prepared a stew with dried herbs she'd found. We ate in comfortable silence until she spoke. Tell me about her. Your woman. I set down my spoon. Why? Because she lives in this house still. I see her in how you fold the blankets, how you set the table. Mary. She was gentle, I said, a sad smile touching my lips. She was morning light you could wrap around your shoulders. Believed in the good in everyone. She would have liked you, I think. She always said strength and kindness weren't opposites, just different ways of caring. My watched me over her cup. And you? Do you see kindness in me? The question hung in the air like smoke. When I looked at her, really looked, I saw a woman who had survived betrayal and violence, who worked tirelessly, who could endure unimaginable pain with a spirit made of steel. I see someone who chooses to heal rather than harm, I said finally, despite having every reason to hate the world. Mai rose and moved to stand before the fire, her silhouette outlined in gold. When she began to pull the pins from her hair, my breath caught. That dark mass tumbled over her shoulders like a waterfall, and she shook it out with an unconscious sensuality. "In my land," she said, turning her dark eyes on me, "a woman's hair is her vow. But I am no longer of that land. And you have shown me what respect looks like." The air between us crackled. I stood slowly, every muscle aware of her nearness, the warmth radiating from her skin, how the firelight played across the hollow of her throat. My voice came out rougher than I intended. She stepped closer, close enough that I could smell the scent of herbs in her hair, see the pulse beating at her temple. "Do you want me to leave when the snow's clear?" God, no, the words tore from me. "But I won't take advantage." She silenced me with a finger pressed to my lips. "What if I am the one who wants to take?" When she kissed me, it was soft at first, tentative, questioning. But when I responded, groaning low in my throat and pulling her against me, she came alive. Her mouth opened under mine, and suddenly, we were devouring each other with the desperate hunger of two people who had been alone for too long. My hands tangled in her hair while hers mapped the breadth of my shoulders. She was all soft curves and warm skin, and when she pressed closer, aligning our bodies perfectly, I thought I might lose my mind. I gasped against her throat. "Are you sure?" Instead of answering, she began unbuttoning my shirt, her fingers sure and swift. When she pushed the fabric aside and pressed her lips to my chest, right over my racing heart, my control shattered completely. I swept her up and carried her to my bed, laying her down like she was made of precious things. In the lamplight, she was golden and beautiful, watching me with eyes that held no fear, only want. We came together, clumsy at first, then fierce, like two people trying to crawl inside each other's skin before the world could take it all back. Years of loneliness melted away as she moved beneath me with a grace that took my breath away. When she gasped my name, her fingers digging into my shoulders, when she arched against me with that final, shuddering release, I felt something in my chest crack open, something I'd thought had died with Mary. Afterward, we lay tangled in the sheets, her head on my chest, my fingers threading through her hair. "I never thought I could feel this way again," I murmured into the darkness. Mai lifted her head to look at me, and in her eyes, I saw my own wonder reflected back. "Nor I," she whispered. "But perhaps some things are worth the risk of feeling." "You thinking I'm a fool, partner?" "Maybe. But when you've been dead inside for 3 years, and someone brings you back to life, you don't question it. You just hold on." Our weeks of blissful, snowbound peace ended with the thaw. Mai heard them first, her head snapping up from where she'd been mending a shirt. "They have come," she said simply, the life draining from her face. I counted 3 riders cresting the hill, dressed in dark, heavy coats. At their head rode an old man whose face was a mask of cold fury. "Guan." "My promised husband," Mai whispered, her hand finding mine. They dismounted at my property line, a deliberate show of power. Guan walked forward alone, his expensive boots crunching in the wet snow. "I seek the woman, Mai," he said in perfect English, his voice thin and sharp as a razor. "The property stolen from my house." "I am here," Mai stepped forward, but she stayed close to my side, a subtle claiming that wasn't lost on the old man. "You dishing your family," Guan's voice was low, but carried a disappointment heavier than anger. "This man has bewitched you, made you forget your duty." "He has reminded me that I have a choice," Mai replied, her voice steady. "Choice?" His laugh was harsh. "You trade your people, your blood, for the bed of a white devil. His kind built the railroad on the bones of our countrymen." The words hit like physical blows, but Mai didn't flinch. "I honor my ancestors by choosing to live, not just obey." I'd stayed silent, but now I stepped forward. "Sir, your intended came to me near death." I gave her shelter and healing. Nothing more was asked or expected. "Yet you take her as your woman," Guan's eyes narrowed. "You defile her." "I love her," I said simply. "And she chooses to stay." The admission hung in the cold spring air. Guan studied us both, this grizzled, white rancher and the woman who was supposed to have been his. Love, he spat. You know nothing of love, white man. Love is duty. Love is honor. He turned to my. Come home, child. Renounce this madness. Your obedience will be your penance. Obedience to a man who beats women for sport. Mai's face was white. Who had his last wife killed? She was weak. You are strong. You will survive. Surviving isn't living. Mai's voice grew stronger. I have learned the difference. Guan's expression hardened. Then you choose exile. You choose to be dead to your people. If that's what freedom costs, Mai said steadily, then yes. The old man's gaze shifted to me. She is my property by law and tradition. But I am a reasonable man. I will give you a chance to prove the strength of this. Love. A trial by combat. My champion against you. Tomorrow at dawn. What kind of proof is that? It proves if you value what you claim to love. If you win, I renounce my claim and leave you in peace. If you lose, he shrugged, the woman returns to face judgment. And if you refuse, my men will take her now, and you will die for harboring a thief. I looked at Mai, saw the fear and resignation in those dark eyes. She expected me to choose safety, to let her go rather than risk my life. But as I looked at her, this fierce, beautiful woman who'd brought light back into my dark world, the choice was already made. Dawn it is, I said. That night, Mai tried to convince me to run. You don't understand, she said, pacing our bedroom like a caged animal. His champion, Wei. He is a hatchet man for the tongs. He has killed many men. Then I'll be one more, I replied calmly, cleaning my colt. This isn't a joke. She grabbed my hands, forcing me to look at her. I'm not worth dying for. I set aside the pistol and cupped her face in my palms. That's where you're wrong, darling. You're worth everything. Dawn came grey and cold, mist rising off the melting snow like ghosts. Wei was everything Mai had said, tall, powerfully built, his face a roadmap of scars. He carried 2 short, heavy blades, his eyes holding no mercy. The terms, Guan announced. Combat until one yields or dies. I stripped to the waist, my pale skin stark against Wei's. I was older, smaller, but 3 years of ranch work had kept me hard, and my eyes held the steady calm of a man with nothing left to lose. It was a short, ugly thing, blades and fists and the taste of your own blood in the mud. Wei came at me like a whirlwind, blades flashing. I dodged and weaved, the cold air burning my lungs. We circled each other, Wei grinning, me grim. When he lunged, I was ready. I caught his wrist, used his momentum against him, and drove my knee into his ribs. The sound of cracking bone echoed across the prairie. But Wei was far from finished. He spun, and a blade sliced across my shoulder, dropping me to my knees. Blood ran down my back, and my scream cut the morning air. Stay down, old man, Wei panted. Die with honor. Instead, I smiled. Not today, friend. I exploded upward, driving my fist into his throat. He stumbled backward, gasping, and I followed up with a combination that would have made my old boxing instructor proud. Left hook to the ribs, right cross to the jaw. The blades went flying. Suddenly, it was just 2 men trading punches under the endless Wyoming sky. We fought until our faces were bloody ruins, until our knuckles were raw, until exhaustion made each blow feel like lifting a mountain. In the end, old scars beat young muscle. When the champion finally dropped to his knees, chest heaving, I stood over him. Yield, I said simply. Wei looked up at me, then at Guan, then back. I yield, he gasped. I could have killed him. Maybe I should have. But I'd had enough of death, and maybe showing mercy was the real proof of what Mai meant to me. 6 months later, Mai stood on our porch, one hand resting on the gentle swell of her belly. The child would come with summer. She wore a simple cotton dress, but the jade pendant was always at her throat. She was between worlds, as Gwan had said, but we'd learned that between could be a place of belonging, too. Gwan had kept his word. They left us in peace. I rode up to the house and swung down from the saddle. At 46, I looked younger than I had in years. Love, as my always said, was powerful medicine. How are my girls today? I asked, wrapping my arms around her from behind and nuzzling her neck. Your girls are fine, she laughed, leaning back against me. Though this one grows restless. I think she will be a rider like her father. Or a warrior like her mother. We stood together in comfortable silence, watching the sun sink toward the mountains. The sky burned gold and crimson. Do you ever regret it? I asked quietly. Leaving your people. I turned in my arms, studying the weathered face she'd come to love more than breathing. How can I regret finding home? You know what I learned, stranger? Sometimes the right choice looks wrong to everyone else. Sometimes love means fighting for someone the world says you shouldn't have. And sometimes the only way to find yourself is to risk losing everything. If this story stirred something in you tonight, I'd appreciate you hitting that like button and subscribing for more tales from when the West was still wild. And drop a comment, let me know where you're watching from. Because out here, under this big sky, we're all just drifters looking for a place to call home.